In telling the story of the Titanic, a lot of different cities in a lot of different countries are mentioned, some more than others. It's a lot to keep straight, so let's break it down a little bit to help you visualize it. One of the most often mentioned places is Belfast, Ireland. Now, since 1912, when the Titanic was sailing, the politics of the area have changed and now it is referred to as Belfast, Northern Ireland. But at the time of the Titanic, it was called Belfast, Ireland. Ireland was all under British rule, but it was one unified state. This is where the Titanic and hundreds of other steamships were built. The Titanic was built alongside her sister ship, the Olympic. And when the Olympic was launched, they started building the RMS Britannic in the same slipway as the Olympic. Now, of course, the Britannic was commissioned by the British Navy and became a hospital ship. But it was here in Belfast where the Titanic was built alongside both of her sisters. It's also from this area that her designer, Thomas Andrews, as well as the majority of her construction crew and design team, as well as the Guarantee Group, were from. Once completed, Titanic conducted her sea trials in the Belfast Lough and then sailed to Southampton. Which brings us to our next location. Southampton, England. This is where the Titanic set sail from on her maiden voyage after sitting at the quay for about a week in preparation. Southampton is second only to Belfast with regards to the amount of time spent in any one single city. But Southampton, England is where the majority of people on board were from. Around 550 of Titanic's crew listed Southampton as their current address, and the city was decimated by the disaster. When the ship was departing, it was also here that the infamous New York incident occurred, where the laid-up SS New York swung out and nearly collided with the Titanic as it sailed out of the Southampton harbor. Across the English Channel, we come to Cherbourg, France. Cherbourg was Titanic's first port of call, where she picked up several more passengers and dropped a few off who were only on board the Titanic for the cross-channel voyage. Titanic sat in Cherbourg Harbor for only a couple of hours as the sun set on April 10th, 1912, before raising anchor again and departing. This was Titanic's only time in mainland Europe. In the morning of April 11th, Titanic arrived at our fourth location, Queenstown, Ireland. As we saw with Belfast in Northern Ireland, Queenstown went through a number of changes as well since 1912. The name of the town changed over to Cove, which was the original Irish name for the town, and it still is Cove today. However, being in the south of Ireland, Cove is still in what is simply called Ireland, as opposed to Northern Ireland as with Belfast. Titanic sailed into the harbor where two tenders, the America and the Ireland, met her, and she sat here for about 90 minutes before returning out into the Atlantic Ocean. From then on, Titanic would never see a port again. But hang on, how does Liverpool factor into this? Well, a lot of half-baked articles online like to cite Liverpool as the city from which Titanic departed from. And I'm assuming they jumped to that conclusion because it says Liverpool on the stern of the Titanic. Well, Titanic was never actually in Liverpool. The Olympic was there, but not the Titanic. Liverpool was Titanic's port of registry, and if her career had been more successful, she likely would have visited there at some point. The White Star Line was headquartered in Liverpool, as was the Cunard Line, and so the Titanic was registered there. Think of Liverpool essentially as Titanic's home address, which she never went to. Titanic was destined for New York City in the United States, but she never made it there. However, New York City is where the Carpathia took the survivors rescued from the disaster to at Pier 54. New York was also the location for the beginning of the American inquiry into the disaster. While the government was still searching for a more permanent location for the investigation, the Waldorf Astoria Hotel was used. And yes, Astoria, as in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, or Astoria, New York, are all named after the Astor family, of which John Jacob Astor IV was killed in the sinking of the Titanic. Halifax, Nova Scotia. It was the closest major harbor to the wreck of the Titanic, and the White Star Line's best chance at chartering ships to sail out to the wreck site and recover bodies. Halifax is where a few hundred of Titanic's bodies were brought, and many are buried there today in graves that are still carefully maintained. It was also erroneously reported by the media in 1912 that the Titanic was safe and being towed to Halifax. This was back when the press was working off of very limited information but still wanted something to print. Now it's time for some honorable mentions. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Aside from Southampton and Belfast, Philadelphia is the city with the most personal connections to the Titanic. Around 150 passengers and crew were either from Philadelphia by birth or traveling to it. Washington, D.C. is where the American inquiry moved after the first few days and continued the investigation in the Senate building. The telegraph office in Cape Race was in constant communication with the Titanic from the night of the disaster and remained in touch with the other ships in the area until after the Titanic had disappeared. Titanic had 3 boat trains. One from London, England, servicing Southampton, another from Paris, France, servicing Cherbourg, and yet another from Dublin, Ireland, serving Queenstown, or Cove. The Olympic was scrapped in Jarrow, England, and the remaining hulk was towed off to the vicinity of Edinburgh, Scotland, for final scrapping. Not terribly far from where the Lusitania and the Queen Mary were built. There's also a few cities that have made their mark on the Titanic in the modern era. Vibrant Titanic attractions exist all around the world, especially in places already connected to the Titanic, but there are a number of others in cities with virtually no connection to the story, but nonetheless, the cultural icon of the Titanic prevails in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, Branson, Missouri, Orlando, Florida, Las Vegas, Nevada, and even a landlocked replica under construction in Sichuan, China. Given the scale, popularity, and influence of the 1997 film, I think it's worth an honorable mention to say that a near full-sized partial replica of the Titanic was built as a film set in Rosarito, Mexico. The most vital Titanic locations, in essentially my opinion, but what I like to call fact, are the places that the Titanic has been to. Belfast, Ireland, Southampton, England, Cherbourg, France, Queenstown, or Cove, Ireland, New York City, which of course Titanic has not been to, but survivors have been, and Halifax, Nova Scotia. This is what I call the top tier Titanic locations. If you're looking to visit Titanic sites, these are the ones that I suggest you check off first because they are the most influential cities on Titanic's story. And in the near future, as in whenever I get around to it, I'm going to make a video showcasing each of these top tier locations and their Titanic connections, as well as show you some of the footage of when our team visited these cities. What else? Did I miss any locations? Does your town have any connections to the Titanic, be it a direct connection or a fun piece of trivia? Leave it in the comments below. I'm really looking forward to hearing about this. If you want to find out more about special locations relating to the Titanic or the White Star Line history, I strongly recommend going to titanicmap.org. It's a community-based contribution kind of thing where people run a Google Maps kind of database, and people can submit Titanic locations. There's all sorts of them. There's probably hundreds, if not a couple thousand, locations on this map that you could check on your phone, and you can visit them and you can see what's near you. You'd be quite surprised. It includes sites the Titanic was, places that had museums, graves of survivors and victims, memorial plaques, and anything else that might be even loosely connected to the Titanic. So that's titanicmap.org.